Okay, so here we are again with Mr. Apollo here. So I start with flexion. I always start with flexion. Even if I'm not even doing groundwork, I always start with this. It's a good little warm-up, good to get him going. You see he was nice and light. He goes and follows me. My body language is still getting better as I'm getting back into shape. They're getting back into shape. Apollo is a tricky little one. He went to follow me and he stopped, and then I made sure he was stopping, which was good. So now we do this side. I just ask for his nose, and he does it pretty perfectly, which is good. Apollo is an interesting dude. His brain is funny. So here, when they start to move and you're just asking for flexion and they start to walk, you just keep the pressure on their nose and you keep moving with them until they stop and turn, and then you release that pressure. It's very light pressure. They just sometimes get confused about what you're asking them to do, and then his response is just to move until you release that pressure. So he has been really lazy with his stops, so that's why I just kind of reiterated, kind of a little more forcefully, was like, hey, you need to stop. Apollo is super smart and super sensitive, and in a lot of ways he's an awesome horse, but sometimes he thinks he knows better than you. So here we're starting to yield hindquarters. He did that perfectly. Apollo also has some lameness on his front end, and I don't know if he's ever fully going to be able to work out of it. Plus, he's 20 years old, and so some of his brain stuff I just reinforce with the rope of what I'm telling him to do, because he's just moving and not necessarily paying attention. So here he's back to lightness, back to doing what I need. So Apollo has twofold of issues in that he has front end lameness that I am starting to think I don't think I'm going to be able to get out of him. Not get out of him, but work him out of with rehab or whatnot. I think it's more of a permanent thing. So honestly, I think I'm just going to unofficially retire him from riding. He can still do groundwork. He can still do EFL perfectly fine. Here I'm asking him to back up by very slightly wiggling the rope, and then he stepped forward. So I just reinforced there. And so then I wiggled the rope for him to back up, and he just did it very softly. I turned my shoulders for him to come up to me. The other thing is he's also a love bug. He just wants to stand and be loved, which is great. But then he thinks that's all you're asking, which it's not when you're on the ground. The other thing is Apollo's little brain. So a little bit it's just his breed. He's an Appaloosa, and he's also an old man. And yes, he can learn and grow, but because of his front end lameness, I don't think I'm gonna push him and try and really, really push him under saddle wise into a better brain space. Groundwork and stuff, yes, because safety, and he's great with kids. So now we move on to lunging. I point the way I want him to go. Then I ask him to stop, putting together the yielding the hindquarters. He does it perfectly. There he wasn't watching and just started anticipating what I wanted, so I make him back up. That's usually our go-to with him, is just making him back up until he's paying attention again, especially because sometimes he does push through the front end. So now I'm just making him stop and wait. And then I kind of drop, ask him to follow me, and then I pop back up to tell him to stop. And he responds really well. He's a smart guy. He just sometimes gets into a panic and gets a little frantic. And you can see that when we start to move him out more on the circle. Here I'm just asking him to move, pointing, waiting, very gently wiggling that rope. And he walks off. So he has the front end issues. So I think I'm just not going to ride him. I think he'll never be ridden ever again, which is fine. And then he has his brain. So he just kind of goes into panic mode on it's just a little too often. He just hops into panic mode, and it's hard to work him out of it. And then the compounding issue there is that when I get him out lunging, kind of put us both in a bad position. So I'm just kind of moving both of us. And then he moved his head over. I'm trying to kind of see exactly what I was doing or thinking here in the moment. A little bit refreshing, a little bit just getting his brain working again, because sometimes he just doesn't. He thinks he knows what you want, and half the time it's not what you want. And he's a fancy horse. He knows a lot of stuff. But so the issue, and why I think I'm just going to officially not ride him ever again, is that, well, first of all, he is technically a pony size-wise. He's a small-framed dude, and I just weigh too much for him. If he was in shape and doing well, yeah, I could ride him. But I weigh too much, especially with his front end lameness, to work him out of it, because he needs lots and lots of time. And then his brain just goes into panic mode, and he tries to give you tons and tons of fancy things instead of just the very simple things that you're asking. That's a little bit what's happening here. He's trying to give me tons of fanciness instead of just doing the very, very, very simple tasks. The other thing is, so with his like movement, which now we're getting into, cutting to lunging, he needs just time to kind of just be out on the circle, walking, trotting, and just kind of trot out his like anxiety, kind of, not like with lots of force, but just like that time. But then he's lame, right? Like his front end, he'll start to limp and he can get tender and whatnot, and he'll run and canter in the pasture, but more and more, so you can see him limping more and more when he's out in the pasture. He'll like run a little bit, but then he just walks nowadays. So I'm gonna get the vet out soon to kind of evaluate how much pain he might be in, see if he needs some like extra anything. It really just this spring has gotten to the point, because I like watch him constantly, right? Here he could have walked that whole time, but he chose to trot, and so that's what it is. Like he needs time trotting and cantering and just like working it out, but his lameness doesn't really like make that easy to do. So I make it as stress-free as possible. I'm not adding tons of pressure. I'm just asking him to do what I'm asking him to do. He's a good horse. People love him. He's such a love bug. He's so great. But when you start to ask him to do things like lunging or under saddle, he just kind of loses his wits. Like he's like, I gotta do everything so fancy, and then as you can see, he doesn't move super great. That head goes up, he's super tense in his neck's kind of a giraffe shape at times, and you want him to drop that neck and relax, but then you can tell he's sore, and so it's like, well, I'm not there. He's dropping his head, which is good. This is actually much improvement from when I first got him. He tried to stop. I told him keep going. Now this whole time he could be walking. I'm not asking him to trot, I'm just asking him to go. So I think the other thing that I'm going to start doing with Apollo as far as groundwork goes is treat training. I've never really done much of treat training. I'm kind of weary about it when it comes to horses because of several reasons. But I think next groundwork session with Apollo, I'm going to try doing some treat training and just see how he responds, to see if that breaks his little brain out of his like crazy tense, crazy fearful mode. And even in this little lesson session, he did so much better. He relaxed so much sooner than he used to. So still improvement, still good. I just think that we're going to change it up with some treat training, and I think that he might be semi-retired, like officially. So here we're done, and I have a lot more to say, and I think this might have been really jumbled because anyway, so here I'm back to very, very light flexion. See, I barely asked him to move his head, and he did. He's a wonderful guy. So stay tuned to learn more about Apollo and training and all that good stuff.